Okay, today we're going to be talking about the 5 data breach risk factors. This is important for you to know because it gives you an idea of what it is that the bad guys are looking for, and also if you're ever in a system, what you should be looking for, right? So the very first item that we care about when it comes to data, and if you want to be able to get access to data, is whether or not that data is being retained. So retention is your number one item to find out about and to look into. So whether you're going to do an audit or you're going to be looking into a company or you want to find out if the information that data reveals to you is going to be valuable to you, is whether or not people are paying money to keep that data. The next piece to this, and a very important piece, is when you're looking at an organization, a company, a business, whatever, if you're interested in their data, try to figure out what it is that they are beholden to. So if they have to use CJIS, which is Criminal Justice Information System data, then that means that they have very specific rules that they have to follow. Another organization might be a doctor's office. What do they have to follow? They have to follow HIPAA. And so HIPAA would be a set of rules, right? And those rules inform that doctor of how much data he is allowed to keep, how long he has to keep it for, whether or not he can get rid of that data. Same thing with CJIS data, same thing with information related to PCI compliance. So all of those items will tell you if that company has to do anything, then it will tell you what they're doing, right? Because most companies and most organizations, they love to hoard. And that also means that if they're going to be data hoarders, they're going to also probably best attempt, to try to follow whatever rules are given to them so they can keep as much data and as much information as possible. And then they will get rid of things or otherwise delete stuff only as is mandatory. Because most organizations, it's very rare that you're going to find an organization that will go in there and clean up their own mess or get rid of things as they maybe should. So even though they might be like full of data that is about somebody's it could be anything. It could be their health records. It could be about the treatment that they received for cancer. It could be sexual orientation. This is all data that to somebody is potentially valuable. And when I say value, I mean there is an incredible amount of value here because everybody has separate goals when it comes to attaining any kind of access to data. Because you could potentially cause severe financial harm to an organization simply by gaining access to their data. You don't even have to sell it. You don't have to do anything with it. You just need to be able to prove that you have that data. And certain organizations are going to lose significant amounts of money. In addition to that, another thing that people like to do is you can actually manipulate the stock market doing this. If you have enough money and you can buy things like call options or put options on a organization, and so you could set yourself up just right so that you can do that and then immediately step in and let everybody know, hey, these people had a huge data breach and this is going to cause them tens of millions of dollars in damages or $1 billion in damages, and now the stock price plummets, and then you take action on your options and then you make a bunch of money. And I would say that we have had situations where people have broken into companies to get access to data that they are retaining specifically for the purpose of manipulating stock prices. That has happened. It exists. There is even a very small blurb about it having happened a few years ago that you can find on the FEC webpage, right? So the next piece is who has that data and how many copies of that data exist. You'll hear this referred to as proliferation. You'll also hear it referred to as distribution. So what we want to know is who's getting copies of that data. Much to the chagrin of the MPAA, just because a piece of data exists doesn't mean that other people cannot have access to that data as well, right? If I have 10,000 social security numbers and I make a copy of those 10,000 social security numbers and I give that copy to somebody else, I'm not necessarily losing my 10,000 copies or my 10,000 individual entries. I am just making a copy of it and giving it to somebody else. Now, we haven't moved to having 20,000 entries, right? I haven't created new people. So the data is still the same data, and potentially that data is going to go bad, or it's going to get locked out, or you're not going to be able to use it for whatever reason. So distribution of that data is oftentimes done very carefully, but that doesn't mean that making copies of the data doesn't happen. Now, if you're on the good guy side and you're asking yourself, well, what do I do? Well, the number one thing that you should be doing as an organization is controlling who has access to that data, and then normalizing the data and potentially scrubbing that data before you give it to like your analysts. So you might have, let's just say 10,000 entries. That's a very small number, right? But let's pretend I have 10,000 entries. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write code in Python to take my 10,000 entries, and I'm going to generate fake data. And it's going to be first name, and instead of it being Sam, it's going to be Binky, right? Last name, instead of it being Hernandez, it's going to be, I don't know, Hermes, right? It doesn't matter. The content doesn't really matter, but what matters is that the format is similar to what the real data is, and you can give that to the individuals who are going to be working with that data so that they never have access to real data. This is a rare thing. If you see this in real life, then you know that the company is taking security seriously, because no other organizations are going to do this. It is going to be such a rare thing, because what they're going to do, and this has happened all over the country, and it happens constantly and continuously. They take the data, they make a copy of it, they hand it to an analyst, and then the analyst puts it on their laptop and they leave with it. And now they have a full copy of the entire database with all entries when they didn't need it. If you're writing code, you don't need a 6 million entry database containing everybody's legitimate social security number on your local machine for doing development. A 9, 10-digit random number to represent social security numbers is just as effective, right? Because it's just numbers. It's just numbers. Work with just numbers. And then when you're done, then plug in the actual data that you need. And there are also, if you look on GitHub, there are tools that exist that you can essentially plug in what your database is supposed to look like. And that tool will actually go in and generate fake data for you. So if you're not creative, or you don't want to reinvent the wheel and sit there and write out a method for generating tens of thousands of fake names, you don't have to. You can get it done, and you can generate as large or as small a file as you'd like very, very quickly. So proliferation, make sure that the data that you are putting out is only to the people who absolutely need it, and do not hesitate to substitute that data for something more secure, aka fake information, whenever possible, so that when you're working with partners, or you're working with developers, analysts, whoever it is that you're going to be sitting there doing business with, make sure that they're not running around with a full copy of your database. Another place where we see this is with the sheer number of contractors in the US military who get access to entire data sets related to items that they're working on. And then they have to throw that on their laptop, and then they're wandering around with it. Go to the East Coast and go get on a subway and take a look around at the number of people who have things like laptop bags that are traveling to and from work. And you would be shocked at the amount of information and data that is probably on those little machines all over the place. So something to think about, right? The next piece is who has access to it. Control that. Again, the number of people who have access to legitimate and real data should be as small as possible. We talk about in cybersecurity a concept known as least privilege, but least privilege can also apply to your data. If they don't need access to it, give them the fake data. And then they can write the scripts, they can write the software, they can write everything, and they can work inside of that fake data. A place where I love to see people mess up with this is the medical industry. And what ends up happening is they will hire vendors from overseas, and those vendors receive our American medical information, and then they do all of the coding, and they do all of the work necessary in order to take that information and make it usable. And that just means that you're sending all of your HIPAA data overseas. And this is valuable information. I don't think people understand how important your medical history can be, especially if somebody decides that they need to target you for something. You would be shocked the things that people go to the doctor's office for, care-wise, and don't want their partners to know about, don't want their family members to know about. And they care about these things, and they care about them dearly. One of the things that I always like to bring up is the Ashley Madison breach. So the Ashley Madison breach was essentially a webpage called Ashley Madison. This webpage was a place that you could go to and you could sign up for it. And then if you were cheating on a spouse, allegedly you could find people to cheat on with, right? And people would sign up for it and they would look around, and then oftentimes they would get cold feet. So they would send a message and they would say, hey, how do I delete my account? I want to get rid of my Ashley Madison account. What do I do? And Ashley Madison would say, well, send us like $250 or something like that, and we'll go ahead and delete your account. And so people would cut a check and send them in $250, and then the account would say, this account doesn't exist anymore. And all it was a flag in a database. So all of those accounts still existed, and Ashley Madison kept that data. They promised you that they would delete it, but they never deleted it. So when somebody got access to that database and they leaked it, one of the very first things that happened was a priest who had created an account and then tried to get rid of it and used all of his own personal information, went out and killed himself, right? And so I always use that as an example because people go to the doctor and they will show up with STDs. They will show up with evidence of being not faithful. They will show up having taken actions that have led to them seeking medical care, and they don't want a family member to know. They don't want anybody to know that they have a permanent STD. They don't want anybody to know about the issues in their lives. And so they show up and they go to the doctor and they get care, and they are keeping that a secret from their spouse or doing whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing. And then the very next thing that happens is that data is going to get released, or somebody's going to get access to that data and then go contact that person. And they're going to say, hey, look, I know that you work at this company. You have access to this data. I want access to that data. If you don't want me to call your wife and tell your wife about what you were doing whenever you went on your trip to Thailand, maybe you should consider taking this USB thumb drive and going and plugging it into a computer, right? And again, once more, you may be thinking to yourself, oh, well, that's a very convoluted plan. Nobody would ever do that. It sounds impossible. Nobody could ever seek somebody out and use their data, but we actually see this with celebrities. Information related to Kanye West has been leaked from his medical records. Another person whose medical records were leaked was Kanye West's wife, who was one of the Kardashians. And essentially, somebody went in and found out that Kim Kardashian and a whole bunch of other people were being treated for a very specific STD. And so they gathered up all that data and then they released it. And some people might not care. But if you do care, then that becomes a humongous problem for you, your company, your life, your family, and so on and so forth, right? So who has access to that data and how do we watch those people? The next piece is, how liquid is that data? That means how easy is it to get access to the data? Once more, what I would tell you is the data itself that you are storing should really very rarely ever need to go out in any form where the data in its raw form is available. Because what you can do is you can take that data and you can put it into an S3 bucket on Amazon. And then you can secure that S3 bucket. And then only via something like Elastistack or some other tool would you expose that data. And then even then, you would only have specific people who have access to Elastistack. Again, it is all about least privilege. It's about control. It's making sure that that data does not leave in bulk. We don't want the data to leave in bulk. You cannot ultimately keep data and not expect it to go somewhere, because it will eventually have to. Somebody needs access to that data. Somebody needs access to the tools. Somebody needs to be able to create reports. Somebody needs to be able to do things with that data. But your responsibility is to keep that data from going out in any bulk format. And the other thing that you need to do, especially like if you have an S3 bucket, this is super easy. You can go in there and you can turn on monitoring of who and what has accessed that data and when. It's going to cost you a little bit of extra money because all of this stuff has to be kind of gathered up and then it gets sent into a method for processing logs. And all of these things cost pennies, right? But if you have a lot of data, pennies add up. You can end up thousands of dollars in debt because of the amount of data that you're messing with, right? But what I would tell you is having those logs and being able to go in and knowing who was dealing with that data, who was working with it, when they were working with it, all of that stuff is incredibly valuable. And if you're a large company, you should be budgeting for it anyways. Believe it or not, keeping your logs is important. Being able to go back through and confirm or deny whether or not somebody accessed that data, that is important. Being able to go back and figure out when did somebody exfiltrate 70 terabytes worth of data from my system, all very important things that you should be able to do. And if you can't do those things, if you can't come in and you can't point out what happened and when it happened and et cetera, then you're doing something wrong, right? For me, I have a bunch of Lambda jobs that I have to occasionally monitor. So I care and feed and water and do all of the things that I'm supposed to do just to make sure that these Lambda jobs are okay. And I have both automated systems in place. So I have systems that go in and will tell me, hey, your Lambda job has generated X amount of dollars worth of work. Just thought you'd want to know. It's 15 days into the month. And this is your normal spend. Let's just say $100 is my normal spend. We are halfway through the month and we're at $48. And I might be able to look at that and be like, okay, yeah, that sounds correct. I'm at about $48 by end of today. I'll be at $50. All of this sounds correct. That's why when you have data and the data is available, you need to know what's happening and what you're doing with it. And then the last piece is value. And you need to think about data from the value of the bad guy's perspective, not necessarily from your value. How much is it worth to somebody to get access to that data? And then can they sell it? Can they use it to cause harm to your business? Oftentimes people don't think about the fact that not everybody wants to make $1 and they may not care. It may not be even anywhere in their mind in terms of how much money can they make off of this information when all they want to do is harm you. And so if you are a doctor's office, if you are a law enforcement agency, if you work for a fire department, or you're involved in critical infrastructure, or you're involved in any of these things, all of these things are incredibly valuable to people who want to make social change within the United States. So whether they are a terrorist organization, or they are involved in social change, or they're involved in protests related to the environment, any of those things, if they can get access to your data and they feel like they're not hurting somebody physically, they're just causing financial harm, then they may take advantage of that and then do harm. And then in addition to that, there's going to be secondary and tertiary and so forth issues that are going to arise. Because if the bad guy gets in and they get all kinds of information about your employees, and so they collect an entire database that has nothing but data about your employees, they may not know how to sell that to make money, but they can release that and they can cause problems with your employees, cause problems with your business, and then potentially cause you to have financial harm because there's going to be an investigation that happens. And then when they release that data, a third party is going to come in and they're going to look at that data and say, oh, I can make money off of this. I can steal people's identities. I can generate credit cards, or I can even go in and change their paycheck, where their paycheck is being delivered, they may be able to make a phone call to HR and start impersonating employees and cause some harm over the weekend, steal 10, 15, $20,000 worth of pay, right? Before you can figure out, oh my gosh, we accidentally changed all of these people's pay information because somebody called in and pretended to be those people. And that happens a lot. That's actually an incredibly popular thing that if I talk to anybody in HR, like literally anywhere, I would tell you one of the number one things that somebody's going to do is they're going to get access to somebody's information, and then they're going to call the HR department and they're going to pretend to be that person, and they're going to try to get their paycheck changed. And that is incredibly common. It is just an incredibly common thing. It happens all day long. It happens everywhere. And so your process for allowing people to change their data, all of that is very, very important. So again, what's the value? What is that data worth? What can people do with it? Sit down and really think as a bad guy, and don't be afraid to think out the box. Don't sit there and say, well, they really couldn't do anything with this data, or my data is not very important. It doesn't have worth. I'm looking at this data and nobody really cares. I could take this data and I could do nothing with it. It's not you. You're not the bad guy. And so oftentimes it also benefits you to sit down and look at what has happened to other organizations. Look up breaches. Look at what data was stolen. Why was it stolen? How much damage did it do to the company, right? Think about Target. Target's a great example. Somebody broke in to the air conditioning company so that they could go from the air conditioning company down into the pay system. They had to pivot, right? They had to move from place to place until they could get to the point where they could start stealing people's credit cards. But they couldn't do that until they first breached a third party. And they had to get access to those people's information, and they got into the company and they looked around, and then from there they moved into Target. And so you might not look at the air conditioner guy or the janitor or the people who are coming in to work on the sprinkler system. All of those people, you may look at them and say, oh, they have absolutely nothing to do with our data. I'm not worried about them. But the truth is they have contact information for people who potentially have admin rights at your company or may need access to building access after hours. All of that is important information that's kept in a database somewhere that now it becomes applicable. Because now I might be looking at that third-party vendor and say, okay, if I can get in there and I break in and I get access to the information about who's running the place at night, now I know who I need to pretend to be. Because also another important piece is, how often do people communicate with each other? Do you know who that guy is? Does he talk to everybody? Because everybody might know his name and might know, oh yeah, the night guy, his name's Billy Bob. But does Billy Bob, do they know his voice? Do they know how he talks? Do they know whether or not Billy Bob forgets his password sometimes? Because now somebody can pretend to be that guy and they know that he's the night shift guy, and they're going to make the phone call and they're going to say, hey, this is Billy Bob. I'm going to be going on to shift in a couple hours. Just wanted to get a hold of you early. Any way you can go in and change my password? Here's my username. That's important. These are concepts that you should keep in mind. So with that said, these are your top 5 items that you need to watch when it comes to data breaches. This is what puts your data at risk. These are some of the companies that have been affected, and hopefully you keep this information in mind when you're trying to protect your organization.